Could you introduce yourself for us?
I'm Knowing Better.
Could you look at the camera when you do?
Oh, sure. I'm Knowing Better. I make videos about history, government, and psychology, and occasionally religion.
And what are some of your recent videos?
Well, I just finished a year-long project where I talked about changes to climate policy, the post office, police militarization, and Mormons. That was my most popular video this year.
Are you a Mormon?
No.
So what qualifies you to talk about them?
I'm also not a postal worker. What kind of bar is that? If I only ever talked about things I've personally been a part of or believe in, I wouldn't have much of a channel.
Okay, so what do you believe in?
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream and Nebula. There are trillions of stars and billions of galaxies in the universe, which means there's an incalculable number of planets with the potential for life. It's a mathematical likelihood that they exist out there somewhere. Imagine if any one of these alien planets developed a civilization that had 1,000 or even 1,000,000 year head start on us. They would be so advanced that their technology would essentially look like magic. The thing is, we don't have to imagine a scenario like that. We've had plenty of those interactions between humans on our own planet. Think about how far we've come in just the last 100 years. We went from the Great Depression in 1929 to landing on the moon in 1969 to, well, we're working on it.
What happened after 1969?
I'd really rather not. Whenever I talk about the 70s, I black out or something. The point is, we've had scenarios here on Earth where two civilizations, which are technologically centuries apart, finally meet. And it's interesting to see how the less advanced civilization reacts. During World War II, the American military used several previously uncontacted Pacific islands as air bases, and they often gave supplies to the locals. When the war ended and the planes stopped coming, the people began building altars and effigies calling for their return. These became known as cargo cults. They basically viewed the advanced civilization as gods. And this isn't a one-off example. Carl Sagan liked to tell the story of the Alaskan Tlingit, who were first contacted by Europeans in the late 1700s, and then recontacted almost a century later, to discover that the story of that first contact was now a religious mythology. And that's just among humans who are a few decades or centuries apart. Imagine a civilization with a difference of thousands of years. How would we interpret what we're seeing? When you see an object like this, your first inclination might be to call it a UFO or a flying saucer, but that's because of your vocabulary. What would someone from 3,000 years ago call it? Obviously not a UFO, and I'm not entirely sure that saucers even existed yet, but you know what did? Clouds, or perhaps a flaming chariot made of light. The book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament tells the story of his encounter with angels who came down from heaven, making a tremendous noise and issuing forth clouds of smoke. The angels are the cherubim, described as having 4 wings and 4 faces, usually depicted as coming from different animals. But again, think of the vocabulary available to him. If you were trying to describe an alien to someone else, you might say that it had a beak like an eagle or a mane like a lion. After a few centuries of oral tradition, you end up with something like this. The angels rode down on vehicles known as thrones, which he describes as looking like wheels within wheels covered in eyeballs. You know what else looks like wheels within wheels covered in eyeballs?
If the Book of Ezekiel accurately describes an extraterrestrial visitation, as many ancient astronaut theorists believe, is it possible that all of our religions are simply alien cargo cults?
That's the theory put forth by Eric von Daniken in his book Chariots of the Gods, written in 1968. People have been talking about the possibility of extraterrestrials for centuries, but they didn't really enter our pop culture until the turn of the century, when we first began to fly. And then it really took off during the space race. A few authors had toyed with the idea of ancient aliens, most notably H.P. Lovecraft in his story At the Mountains of Madness. But nobody had framed it as a serious academic theory until Daniken. While studying the Bible at his Christian boarding school, Daniken noticed that many characters and stories paralleled the mythologies of other cultures from around the world. What if they all refer to the same historical events? The Egyptians prayed to a pantheon of half-animal gods, the Greek gods flew around on clouds and chariots, and the Sumerians believed that the Anunnaki came down from the stars. What if these are all different interpretations of the same gods? The Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Sumeria tells the story of when Gilgamesh visited the gods in heaven. Gilgamesh was a demigod, much like Hercules. While he was there, he met Utnapishtim, who centuries earlier was warned to prepare for a worldwide flood by building a boat. We see this same story in Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Christianity. Moses grew up in the palaces of Egypt as an adopted son of the pharaoh and likely studied the Epic of Gilgamesh. When it came time to lead his people to freedom, he simply adapted the story. Utnapishtim's flood became Noah's flood. Since the Epic of Gilgamesh is the original and contains far more detail, we should take that one as the most accurate telling of events, which means Gilgamesh and therefore Noah were both part alien. We all know the boat story is a bit of a stretch, but what if the Ark was just a misinterpretation of a spaceship meant to save a few select humans from the flood?
But if Noah's flood and the Epic of Gilgamesh are different accounts of the same event, as ancient astronaut theorists have speculated, why would the gods warn us? Could the biblical flood be a preconceived event meant to clear away the human race with a few notable, controlled exceptions?
Hi, KB Morgan here from KB Morgan's Gold Pawn, Check Cashing, Rent-A-Center, and Payday Loans. Due to a shipping error, I've recently come into possession of an overabundance of untraceable, unregistered golden forks, and I'm letting you in on the deal. Just head over to patreon.com/knowingbetter and sign up at the Golden Fork tier. In addition to a shout out in the next video, every new member this month will receive one Golden Fork certificate by email in the form of a PDF. If you include your address, you'll get the real thing. This isn't a scam, I promise. Supplies are limited, so sign up today.
Our solar system is about 4.5 billion years old, but the Earth only cooled down around 500 million years ago. That's how short of a time life had to take hold on this planet. Mars cooled down 1 billion years earlier. It had an atmosphere, a temperate climate, and water on its surface. So it's entirely possible that life formed on Mars first. I'm not talking about bacterial microbes frozen in the ice. I'm talking about an advanced civilization of intelligent beings. If you've ever played Doom, you've seen evidence of that.
Okay, that's the second video game you've brought up.
Know your audience, man. Besides, you just have to look at the moons of Mars to notice that something isn't quite right. Unlike every moon in our solar system, they aren't round. They look more like asteroids. They're completely out of place.
Mainstream astronomers have agreed that the Martian moons Phobos and Deimos are captured asteroids from the nearby asteroid belt. But if that's true, then captured by whom? And for what mysterious purpose?
It's entirely possible that this ancient Martian civilization artificially captured these asteroids, either for mining or to stabilize the planet's rotation. Either way, they were intentionally put there. After Mars suffered an ecological collapse, possibly triggered by those artificial moons, the civilization fled to the nearest planet, Earth. You probably know this as the panspermia hypothesis. When they came here, they found the planet full of different species of hominids, and over a period of thousands of years, interbred with them to create modern humans, which the Greek gods did on a regular basis. These Martians would have been larger and stronger than any humanoid on Earth, which is why we have legends of giants in just about every culture. They also lived far longer than us. As you read through all of the people who knew and begot each other in the Bible, you'll notice that people used to live for hundreds of years, and as that blood was diluted, our lives got shorter. It's entirely possible that we might be the descendants of or the creations of ancient Martians.
But if extraterrestrials came to Earth to breed humans, as many ancient astronaut theorists believe, to what end?
Human civilizations seem to spring up out of nowhere and started in the Americas, specifically Nazca, Peru. We know this because of the archaeological evidence which is still visible to this day. The famous Nazca lines are dozens, if not hundreds, of geometrically perfect lines crisscrossing the plateau. You also find enormous depictions of animals that can only be seen from the sky. Why would the ancient Nazca people make this giant artwork that they themselves could not see? To me, it's obvious. Nazca, Peru is a perfect microcosm of everything you can find on Earth. Gold, silver, uranium, you name it. And anything that isn't located on the plateau is depicted in these giant pieces of art, almost as if they're advertising what is available on this planet to any spaceship passing by, which can then land on any number of these airstrips. This is obviously an ancient alien spaceport. Extraterrestrials genetically modified or interbred with humans in order to create a species smart enough to mine elements like copper and gold for them, which they could then pick up at the Nazca spaceport. Think about it, gold and copper are pretty much useless metals. They're too soft for weapons or tools, so historically the only thing we've used them for is jewelry. We've only recently discovered their uses in electronics and space travel. It's entirely possible that the only reason we exist is to mine precious metals for a species who already knew how to properly use them. We've seen this story pop up numerous times in our religious texts and even pop culture, from Stargate to Transformers to Alien vs. Predator.
They taught humans how to build and were worshipped as gods.
Now you're citing movies as evidence.
Look, what are movies and video games if not modern retellings of ancient epics and oral traditions? And the physical evidence is all around us. There are cave paintings from around the world separated by thousands of years which depict humanoid beings wearing astronaut suits. What do you think those angelic halos really are if not helmets? Many ancient people, including the Nazca, practiced skull elongation, shaping the soft craniums of infants until they looked like this. What does this look like to you? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Once these developed humans had served their purpose, the extraterrestrials needed to get rid of the evidence. Some of the areas in Nazca, Peru have way too many lines to be an airstrip. No airport has this many runways. Do you know what this looks like to me? When you compare it to a picture of Hiroshima, it isn't that much of a stretch to imagine what it would look like after a few thousand years of erosion. These are city streets. This ancient lost city full of futuristic technologies like air travel goes by a number of different names in our mythology, like the legendary city of Atlantis. But it could also be Sodom and Gomorrah. Why else would the angels be in such a hurry to get Lot and his family out of the city by a specific time? And why couldn't Lot's wife turn around and look at it? Because it was destroyed by a nuclear meltdown or intentional explosion caused by the aliens.
If humanity was bred to mine resources for extraterrestrial space travelers, as many ancient astronaut theorists believe, wouldn't there be evidence for this theory outside of Nazca? Turns out, there is.
Once their experimental humans were intelligent enough to serve their purposes, the aliens caused a worldwide flood to destroy all of the unsuccessful specimens. That's what happened to the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and all of the other hominids. This flood, coupled with the destruction of Nazca, displaced the bulk of humanity from the Americas to Eurasia. Then we spread out and formed new cultures based on the same stories. Why does every civilization have a similar flood myth and tales of dragons and giants? Because those stories were literally true. Why do we see pyramids built all over the world by civilizations who supposedly never knew about each other? Maybe these were imitations or effigies of alien spacecraft, just like the cargo cults. The pyramids of Giza hold a lot of significance. They line up just like Orion's belt, which happens to be the birthplace of stars. How could they know that without a telescope? The pyramids also perfectly divide the world in half along the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. How could they have possibly have figured that out? How did the ancient Egyptians have a decimal system, and why did they practice mummification? What were they saving these bodies for? Maybe that was their best attempt at recreating stasis or freezing astronauts for interstellar travel. Egyptology and ancient alien theory go hand in hand. There are simply too many unanswered questions. You expect me to believe that they did all that by themselves? The extraterrestrials didn't leave us alone after all that. They continued to send down messengers to guide humanity in whatever direction best suits them. God and all of the biblical prophets were at least part alien. In the Bible, God always speaks in the plural. Let us make mankind in our image, and man has become like one of us. Why don't we ever take this literally? It's practically an admission. And more importantly, they never show their face. They always appear as a burning bush or a bright light, or speak through objects like a stone. Prophets like Moses and Jesus were specifically sent down here to gather a chosen few to lead them to a promised land, whether that be a physical or heavenly place. And this isn't unique to the Abrahamic religions. Quetzalcoatl was a demigod who took the form of a dragon and did the same for the peoples of Mesoamerica, creating the Incans, Aztecs, and Mayans, who also built pyramids. How much more evidence do you need? When Europeans finally arrived in the Americas, they found that the Aztecs and Mayans had a calendar that reached back tens of thousands of years and a vastly superior knowledge of astronomy. They even knew about Neptune and Uranus centuries before the West. When the conquistadors and priests arrived, they burned all of this ancient knowledge, calling calling them pagan texts. They were on a mission to convert everyone to Christianity.
According to mainstream historians, the texts were burned by Friar Diego de Landa in 1562. But what if this act of religious zealotry was little more than an alien cover-up?
What if these texts bore a true account of how these people came across this knowledge, and the Spanish just wanted to burn the evidence? How else could these primitive brown people possibly know more about the stars than the Europeans? I'm not saying they learned it from aliens, but...
Now, are you alright?
I just realized how racist that sounds.
You just realized that?
Yeah. What do you mean, just realized? Are you saying that ancient alien theory is just a way to continue to believe in white supremacist fairy tales through a science fiction religion rather than a supernatural one? Or am I saying that? I think I'm going through a bit of a crisis here. Setting aside the scientific racism and eugenics movements that were popular when he was growing up, Daniken's theory was completely compatible with mainstream Christianity. It was just a new way of looking at things. All of the events of the Bible happened just as they were described, and people like Noah, Moses, and Abraham were real. They were just alien messengers rather than supernatural prophets. Because of this plausible compatibility, the book became pretty popular in Europe, though it would take a while before it made it over to the States. All that changed. No, change the light back. We're not doing that joke anymore. It's a dead meme. Anyway, it didn't catch on in the US until a documentary based on his book was released in 1970, which became the 9th highest grossing movie that year. It was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1971. After the book and movie came out, there was an increase in UFO sightings, along with hundreds of unexplained cattle mutilations and crop circles.
Didn't you guys admit to faking those?
Yeah, only in England though. That doesn't explain the hundreds, if not thousands of them that have appeared around the world ever since. They can't all be fake. Keep in mind, they didn't appear after Roswell. It was only after Chariots of the Gods. And in the decades since, Daniken has written dozens of books, and several other people have brought new evidence to light, which has expanded on the original theory. How do you think this show has been going for 16 seasons?
Does this have any overlap with other conspiracies like QAnon?
No, we're not like them. QAnon is what we call a big tent conspiracy because multiple theories can fit inside of it and they don't always conflict. It's hard to broadly define what they believe. Some of them believe that the world is being controlled by a Satan-worshipping cabal who drink the blood of children. Others believe that they're reptilian shapeshifters who may or may not be aliens. Some of them believe that the world is flat, space travel is impossible, and therefore the moon landing was faked. We obviously don't believe that. Ancient Aliens is more of a shotgun theory. We throw a lot of disconnected, unexplainable phenomena out there, any number of which could be true. And they do sometimes get in the way of each other. The benefit to this sort of theory is that if any one of the facts miss their mark or are disproven, there are dozens of others that might still land for you. Not everyone believes in every facet of ancient alien theory.
But what if everything ancient astronaut theorists claimed was true? If mainstream archaeologists and historians are wrong, what is the true history of our planet? Don't worry, I'm not gonna speak like the ancient aliens guy the whole time. So, watch my video about that, I guess.
Here at Knowing Better, we strive to bring you the highest quality content possible. If you've noticed an increase in that quality over the last year, that's thanks to the fine community we've grown over on Twitch. Every week, you can see and participate in the process live, whether that's researching, writing, or editing. The community asks me a lot of questions and offers a lot of feedback, which has really brought out that signature Knowing Better flavor you all know and love. YouTube and Twitch aren't the only ways you can participate. Over on Twitter and Instagram, we ask community questions and do polls to gather data, and sometimes tease upcoming video topics. We take your input super serial, because here at Knowing Better, you're not just subscribers or followers, you're family, and you've helped bring these videos more integrity.
Paid for by those who know better.
If Daniken's theory is correct, and biblical prophets like Noah, Moses, and Abraham were extraterrestrial messengers, would they not still send messengers today? And if they did, who would believe them?
Hello, my name is Kay Bodie,
And how did you become involved in all of this?
Well, I had just graduated high school, and there was a lot of bad stuff going on in the country at the time.
What bad stuff?
I don't really know. I was still pretty young and I wasn't really paying that much attention. Anyway, a lot of us distracted ourselves by retreating into fiction. I read a lot of Robert Heinlein and L. Ron Hubbard. We had just landed on the moon. Science fiction was really popular. Then I saw this documentary that raised a lot of interesting questions about the pyramids and whether angels and prophets were actually aliens. And it just sort of made sense to me. So when I heard that there was this mysterious couple traveling around the country gathering followers to take them to outer space, well, that was right up my alley. In September 1975, I attended a meeting in Waldport, Oregon, along with 200 other people. 34 of us joined that day. They were originally known as the Two, which is a reference to the book of Revelation, since they thought the world was about to end. They were hardly alone in thinking that. This was the height of the Cold War. Plenty of other religions claimed that in the past too, but this was the first time anyone had incorporated science fiction elements into it.
We came from distant space, what your religious literature would call the kingdom of heaven, and we're about to return.
They believed that they were just another in a long line of biblical prophets, like Moses and Jesus, who were actually alien messengers sent down here to gather a group of loyal followers to take them back to heaven.
We have the simple truth, though the most potent truth, and it is the identical truth that Jesus brought to human beings 2,000 years ago.
After a few dozen of us had joined their flock, the Two changed their name to Bo and Peep, which implied that their followers were sheep. That didn't really sit well with us, since we were all part of the free-thinking hippie counterculture and we didn't like thinking of ourselves that way. So they changed their name to T and Doe, from The Sound of Music. In truth, Doe's real name was Marshall Applewhite. A few years prior, he was a music professor in Alabama and had a homosexual affair with a student, which cost him his job and his marriage. His father was a Presbyterian minister and died in 1971. All of these events caused Marshall to have a mental breakdown, and while in a psychiatric ward in Texas, he met a nurse named Bonnie Nettles, who would later become known as T. Bonnie was really into New Age religious thinking, including astrology, crystal healing, and UFOs, and convinced Marshall that they were soulmates with a special divine assignment. In 1974, they began traveling the country to spread their message. That message was that heaven was a real physical place known as the next level, which you could see if you had a powerful enough telescope. And to get there, you needed to go through a human individual metamorphosis. This was a process that would physically transform your body into that of a perfect alien being, allowing you to board a spacecraft that would take you there. This process required you to leave behind everything that made you human. They taught that you needed to let go of your possessions, your family, your job, anything connected to your humanness. And you needed to do that quickly because the ship would arrive at any moment. The group traveled around the country staying at different campgrounds and holding meetings to gain more followers. T and Doe would eventually call this period the harvest, but we were pretty heavily maligned in the press, calling us a UFO cult and blaming us for a number of cattle mutilations which took place wherever we happened to be staying. They even called our leaders Pied Pipers from outer space. This unfair lampooning by the media caused T and Doe to close the harvest in 1976, and the group, which only had a few dozen members, became much more insular. This is when our doctrine was really developed. That year, they printed a guidebook for our beliefs titled How and When Heaven's Gate, the door to the physical kingdom level above human, may be entered. We never actually called ourselves Heaven's Gate. We were known as the crew, or the class, and T and Doe became our teachers. Aside from that, there really wasn't any hierarchy. We didn't have priests, bishops, and cardinals or anything. Again, this was an individual process. Everyone was on their own journey to perfect themselves and leave behind anything that made them human, including their thoughts and emotions. We invented an entirely new vocabulary to disassociate ourselves from our past feelings. Your body is your vehicle, your mind is your computer, and your thoughts are your programming. Everyone dressed in unisex clothing in order to look androgynous, since everyone in the next level is genderless, which meant you had to repress your sexuality. Everyone was celibate. We lived a monastic lifestyle, and everyone was assigned a check partner who was with you at all times, to make sure you were following all of the rules. They limited what media you were allowed to consume, but one of the few shows we were allowed to watch as a class was Star Trek. According to Doe, we should aspire to be like the Borg. We were also given new names, usually 2 or 3 letters followed by ODY, so my name became K-Bodhi. This further disconnected us from our past selves. Leaving the group was physically easy. Nobody would try to stop you since this was supposed to be an individual process. You'd just be giving up your chance to graduate to the next level. A few of the people who left the class over the years eventually came back, since they had trouble reintegrating into society after learning the truth.
You mean after they were brainwashed?
We don't think of it like that. It's more of a baptism of the mind. Plenty of doubters left the group over the years, leaving the rest of us to focus on the teachings of Do. It was kind of nice not having them weigh us down anymore.
What's up guys, Knowing Ferrets here. Did you know that I have 2 ferrets now? Atlas and Peabody. Like from the game. You know the game, which means you also just lost it. Oh! I just want to ask you one question. Do you want to know more about ferrets? Of course you do. What kind of question even is that? Well, you should head over to curiositystream.com/knowingbetter. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and nonfiction titles, which you can access across multiple platforms. I specifically recommend that you watch Meet the Mustelids, quite possibly my favorite animal documentary ever. Check it out by also signing up for Nebula, a streaming service built by fellow extraterrestrial beings just trying to guide humanity along the right path. All of my content is hosted over there ad-free, and viewers who watch this video over on Nebula get to see a few jokes which were too spicy for YouTube, as well as a different commercial segment. So head on over to curiositystream.com/knowingbetter. For a limited time, you can get a subscription to both CuriosityStream and Nebula for only $14.79 a year. You'll also be supporting the channel when you do. And if you want to learn even more about ferrets, I also did a collab on this channel a few years ago that you should check out. I haven't thought of an ending for this commercial yet, but when I do, I'll put it right.
If human bodies were simply extraterrestrial vehicles, which need to perfect themselves in order to get into heaven, as T and Do believed, what happens when that vehicle breaks down?
In 1985, Bonnie Nettles, otherwise known as T, died of cancer. This really shocked the class. If she was a perfect alien being from outer space, how could her vehicle break down like that? This was especially hard for Do. For the first time in 10 years, he sent the entire group home, and even began to question whether he should continue the class. T was the real spiritual leader of the group. Do often referred to her as his older member. She was way more into astrology, metaphysics, all that new age stuff. Do was the son of a preacher and was far more Christian, so when he invited everyone back, everything shifted away from science fiction. You'd no longer physically transform into an alien being or get on an actual UFO. It was now a spiritual journey. After a few years, Do began teaching that he was the reincarnation of Jesus and that T was continuing to guide him from space, which meant, as his older member, she was God.
Blasphemy. You say you're from the kingdom of God. Who do you think you are? Jesus? Who do you think you are? God?
While being soulmates, T and Do were never romantically involved because, well, Do was very obviously homosexual and very obviously ashamed of it. He tried repressing it for years, but eventually he asked one of the earliest members to leave the group because his vehicle had become attracted to their vehicle. When that wasn't enough, the castrations began. In order to rid themselves of their normal human male sexual desires, a few members of the class decided it would just be easier to remove the parts that made them male. Do and about 5 or 6 other classmates went through with it, and these increasingly radical moves caused a lot of people to start leaving the group. So in 1991, Do opened up the second harvest. We began a satellite TV show called Beyond Human, and were incredibly active on the early internet, especially Usenet. Do was a frequent poster on UFO forums, so when the Hale-Bopp comet was discovered in 1995, we were among the first people to know about it. In 1996, a picture was taken which appeared to show a companion trailing behind the comet. This was obviously the spaceship T and Do had been talking about for the last 20 years. This was a sign. It was time to plan our exit. You have to remember, this was around the same time as Ruby Ridge and Waco. The government was taking out cults left and right, so we had to keep our plans secret. We decided to wait until the comet was a bit closer, which was supposed to happen around Easter, so we spent a few months going on road trips to see everything one last time. The companion was eventually disproven, but that didn't matter. Our path was clear. On March 22nd, 1997, 39 Heaven's Gate members, 21 women and 18 men, committed suicide through a combination of phenobarbital, alcohol, and a plastic bag. This was, and still is, the largest mass suicide on US soil. They died in 3 groups, each group taking care of the previous and covering them with a purple shroud, except for the last 2 people, for obvious reasons. They wore all black uniforms with a patch on their shoulder and black and white Nike shoes.
Why aren't you dressed like that?
Because it's 2021. Those who went through with it believed that their spirits would be taken up to the alien spaceship to travel to the next level, which again is just what we call the kingdom of heaven. A few of us were asked to stay behind and document the scene and maintain the website and intellectual property, and many of us continue to believe in the teachings of Tien Do. In the weeks and months that followed the exit, 3 other members committed suicide in the hopes of catching up to them. A few others attempted but didn't succeed. At this point, I figured it'd be best to just wait for Hale-Bopp to swing around again, which should happen in the year 4384. Until then, I'm looking into mummification, since we haven't invented cryostasis yet.
You know they remove your brain for that, right?
Your brain has nothing to do with it. Your brain is sort of, well, I don't know, brain is brain. What it does, I'm never quite sure, and I'm not sure anybody else is either. This is all a spiritual journey. You need to stop relying on your brain's programming, because now you know better. Pay no attention to the date this video is published. That's just a coincidence. I'd like to give a shout out to my newest Golden Fork patron, Benjamin. If you'd like to add your name to this list of extraterrestrial demigods, head on over to patreon.com/knowingbetter, or for a one-time donation, paypal.me/knowingbetter. Don't forget to abduct that subscribe button or the join button if you really want to enter the next level. Check out the merch at knowingbetter.tv, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and join us on the subreddit.